All right. So for you guys, your final is a test. It will be much shorter than the normal final. I was just looking this morning at last year's study guide for the final, and it had 92 items on it. Yours won't be that long. I don't know how long it will be. I'm gonna have to transfer questions, decide which ones I want to do, which ones I don't want to do. But it'll probably be between 50 to 60 questions. There's not going to be a study guide. Reason being, you're going to be able to take this and, you know, I fully expect you can use your book, you can use your notes, you can use past tests because this is cumulative, meaning it will cover from chapter one to what we've covered. Um, so I don't know how Josh is on twice, but he's on here twice. At least what it's showing me. Um, so However, over half of the test, meaning half the questions, will be from chapters 12 through 18, and really chapters 12 through 14, and a couple questions outside those chapters. I also am going to make it easier on you. The test will be in order. It's not going to be out of order. It's not going to have a question from chapter 18, then one from 3, then one from 5, then one from 12. It's going to be chapter 1, and it will be listed in order the question. So as you're taking the test, that should help you as far as that goes. It will be all multiple choice, true, false, matching. There won't be any short answer, any essays. It will be taken online like we did the last test. It'll be the same website. I will send you a link on Monday morning before 8 a.m. because you can take it anytime between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. on Monday. It does count as your final, so it's worth 15% of your grade. You will have 90 minutes to take the test. Um, I still would suggest you look at your notes. I would suggest you have like your notes out. I would suggest you have out past tests, especially because I'm going to take from your past tests. Hopefully, you didn't throw them all away. If you did, then that stinks. But from your past tests, I literally am going to draw questions directly from those. It'll be the exact same questions. I might have the multiple choice parts might be in a different order or something, but it's going to be from those tests. Now, like I said, there is some new material that won't be from past tests, but that will be anything from chapter 12 on. That'll be stuff we've taken notes on, and I've had you do notes, your notes assignments. I would have those handy. You've sent me those. Maybe you want to print them out, or at least have them open on a window on your computer so you can glance at them if you need to. Um, so those things should help you in taking the final. I don't know that there's a whole lot else. It's pretty easy once we only did it once, so maybe as a reminder, you'll click on the link. If that doesn't work, I've tried it out myself. I did find it's weird. One time I tried to click on the link and it would take me the test, but as soon as I copy and pasted it in, it worked. So I don't know why that would be any different. But either way, one of those would work. You'll get there. It will ask you for your email and then a password. That is simply so in case in the middle of the test something happens, like say your power goes out, or of course in that case you definitely have to come back and take it later. But even if you got to sign out, I'm trying to think of what could happen. But maybe something emergency does happen, or maybe a fire alarm goes off in your house. Maybe there's not a fire, but the fire alarm goes off, and you need to leave your house. Well, you can save it at that point in time, come back and take the rest of it later. That's why it asks you for the email and password. After that, you'll do that, and then it will actually ask you for your name, and it sends me the results. If you remember, it's kind of weird. When the test is finished, eh, you click to yes, are you okay? So, because it's going to ask you multiple times to like submit, kind of, because the first time is like, are you sure? You don't want to go back and change any answers, which you can do. You can always go back and change something if you want, recheck through things, and then once it's submitted, it just goes to a page, and you can't really do much from there. It Trust me, it will have submitted at that point in time. But it is kind of weird because it doesn't say, "Hey, you just sent an email." It doesn't do that. It just finishes. So um, if I somehow don't get your test, I'll let you know, um, and we'll work something out. Now, if something crazy happens, like your internet's completely out, or your power goes out, or something, and you can't take the test, I can work an arrangement for you to take it another time. But obviously, I hope that doesn't happen. The preferable thing is for you to take it between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. on Monday. Also, continue working on your biography if you haven't finished that. That is due this Saturday. Um, I don't know how far along you guys are. I had to do a little bit just to make sure you had gotten some done, but a few notes. You have to have 5 sources because I've had some people who didn't have that many sources. Another thing that I found that was kind of interesting is some people's, and this was a formatting thing. Like everything else was pretty okay, but they had um, for some reason done to center. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but they had centered everything, probably because they had the title on the top of their page, and then they had centered the whole paper. But it's really weird looking. So you need to make sure everything is justified to the left, like that is. I could even probably let me pull up Word. I know you guys might be doing it on Google, but it's the same type of concept. So need a blank document though. So hold on, let me open a blank document here, and then I'll share it with you guys. I didn't do this for the last class, but I just thought of this. Okay, now let's share screen, blank document here. Okay, so right now I'm already justified to the left. So when I type, it starts over here. I don't know why it's on cursive. It does that because I did that for envelopes. The Qs make default. But that's where you want to be. But what I've seen is some people's papers, as they're typing, it's like this, and then once they get sentences, it looks really weird. I mean, I'm not going to type anything real. I'm just like, yeah, that's a really long sentence. But then if you hit enter and then you see it how it's all centered, that's really kind of weird. So make sure it's always instead make sure everything's on the left. Unless it's a title, like I said, a title you can put centered, but then make sure you've done everything else to the left. Otherwise, the paper looks really odd and it's kind of strange. So, all right. So now we're going to do a few notes. So if you have something to write on, I would be writing these down. We're going to talk about 2 other events that we hadn't got to yet. One of them very recent, meaning about a little over 25 years ago, which is pretty recent in terms of history, if you think about it, especially for major events. But I want to talk about one before that. This one is in chapter 15. This will probably be the only question out of chapter 15. But during chapter 15 is when you have the Great Depression going on in the United States. And you have a pretty important events going on in Oklahoma due to some of the agricultural practices of the time. Now, it's partly due to, from 1914 to 1919, you had World War I going on, 1918 really, going on across the globe. In the United States, even before they got involved in the war, they were sending some food to the Allied nations. And eventually, once the troops got into the war for the United States, the farmers began to farm more and more and grow more and more crops. And it was very profitable for that time period for farmers. So they were encouraged to farm all of their land, not leave any of it where there's grassland, just farm it all. Well, as you go into the 1920s, the farming market crashes because for most people, the Great Depression starts in the 1930s, 1929, 1930. For farmers, unfortunately, it starts after World War I's over, and farmers struggle through the 1920s and the 1930s. So what happens is they eventually start not using some of those fields, but they had plowed up all the grass, all the things on top, and all they had was loose soil on top. So that led to a pretty catastrophic problem during the Great Depression when huge windstorms hit. In primarily, they would start in the epicenter would be around the panhandle of Oklahoma. Now, this affected more than just Oklahoma. It affected the epicenter here for where most of these sandstorms would originate, not sandstorms, dust storms would originate, would be in the panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas, the very far northeastern part of New Mexico, the southeastern part of Colorado, and the southwestern part of Kansas. That's kind of where the epicenter for the beginning of all these dust storms would happen. And this is where it's a dry area going through a drought, not getting much rain, and heavy wind comes and picks that dust up and blows it across the plains. Some of them being an intense amount of dust storms. So the worst dust storm occurred on what was known as Black Sunday, which was April 14th, 1935. April 14th, 1935, Black Sunday. The dust clouds begin, and the wind begins blowing, and it lifts the soil up to 8,000 feet in the air. So if you guys aren't aware, that's over a mile and a half high dust storm. We're not talking about, a couple hundred feet, talking about a mile and a half dust. This is immense. Now, you have to either give me a thumbs up or unmute. Has anybody seen the movie Interstellar? Anyone seen the movie Interstellar? You might be like, what does that have to do with the Oklahoma dust storms? It doesn't really have anything to do with Oklahoma dust storms, but in that movie, they have dust storms, and they do a great job recreating how terrible it would be. Because when these dust storms were at their worst, there were days like for some reason, if you were outside in it, good luck. You might seriously die. It's that bad. But if you were outside, I got my hand up by about a foot or two in front of my face right here. You couldn't see your hand up. It's like 2 foot in front of your face. That's how heavy the dust was. And even if you had your door shut, your window shut, it still would seep in under the doors and in the cracks in the doors and the cracks in the windows. Many people got ill and sick from this. That dust storm that occurred April 14, 1935, Black Sunday, that dust eventually went all the way to New York City. And it still was a dust storm in New York City. That's how much dust it picked up. It threw it all the way. The wind kept blowing all the way across the East Coast. But it was worst in the Panhandle and in the other parts of Oklahoma as it moved west. The wind would always, for these particular storms, would pretty much always start in the western part of the state and blow to the east. So very significant, because most states weren't hit this bad by the dust storms. In fact, from 1936 to 1940, 309,000 people moved out of Oklahoma, most of them going to California to seek out opportunity. Many of them drove along Route 66. Here's another thing that will be on the test. Route 66 today has a nickname of the Main Street of America. So Route 66, the Main Street of America, partly because it goes all the way across the country. Some people like to take road trips and just go across Route 66. I prefer traveling faster, so I'm not as cool. But a lot of people who want to drive and want to do a lot of stops and want to stop at small towns and see all these places that might be of some interest to them might just travel across the country on Route 66. And a lot of people leaving here during this time period did the same. They traveled out to California on Route 66, the Main Street of America. One man actually wrote about this in a fiction novel, although it's based on some factual things. His name's John Steinbeck. You guys have probably heard of him. He also wrote of Mice and Men. But he wrote, for this book, it was called The Grapes of Wrath. And it was about a family from Oklahoma living through the Depression during these dust storms, and that they left the state and eventually went to California. He was the first to coin the term Okie and use the term Okie. It initially was used disrespectfully towards all migrant and agricultural workers. Today, the word Okie doesn't have any negative connotation anymore, but at that point in time, it was kind of seen as a negative term. So that's it as far as the dust storms, but that's a pretty significant event in Oklahoma history and fairly unique to Oklahoma. I did say it does affect other states, but it affected Oklahoma probably more than any other state in the United States. The last thing I want to talk about, and this would be a terrible class if I didn't talk about this one. I'm saying in Oklahoma history, if I don't talk about the Oklahoma City bombing, it would be a travesty. So this is definitely something I want to cover. It's always one of my favorite stops on the trip. Even though I've been there several times, it is a phenomenal place. So if you have not been, and I mean this, because I don't say this about every place we go on the trip, if you never get to Fort Sill or Fort Smith or Fort Gibson, it'd be cool if you go visit those places, but it's not that big a deal. But I'm telling you, you all should go visit some point in time in your life the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial City. It is state of the art. It is well done. It's heart wrenching. It is, the imagery on the outside is amazing, and the museum on the inside is, like I said, it's state of the art. I mean, they spent a lot of good money on this to make it a memorial to those people who died there. So let's walk through this. So April 19th, 1995, might want to write that date down. April 19th, 1995 starts like any other day. People going to their jobs, people going to work. Seems like it's going to be an average everyday day. Same for the people going to the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. There's lots of different federal agencies who are housed there. There also was a children there because there was a daycare center on the second floor of this building. So, like I said, the day begins normally. An ex-Army soldier and security guard named Timothy McVeigh. You might want to write that name down. Timothy McVeigh. I'll spell the last name McVeigh. It is in your book as well. If you want to look, it's in chapter 18. But Timothy McVeigh drives a rented Ryder truck. So it's a moving truck, a Ryder brand, to the front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. Inside the vehicle was a powerful bomb made out of agricultural fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. He got out, locked the door, headed towards his getaway car, and he ignited a timed fuse and then another fuse. And then things changed at 9:02 a.m. when the bomb exploded. It could be heard and felt up to 55 miles away. Okay, so this is not a small little bomb. It destroyed a third of the building in an instant. Well, I say an instant, it might have taken a couple seconds, but a third of the building was blown away. Within moments, the surrounding area looked like a war zone. Many floors were flattened like pancakes. Dozens of cars were incinerated. In fact, 86 cars were burned and destroyed. Other buildings, not besides this one, 324 other buildings in Oklahoma City suffered damage. 324 buildings. Within a 16-block radius, it shattered glass in nearly 258 nearby buildings. It caused nearly $652 million worth of property damage. But more important than that is the loss of life. 168 people lost their lives as a result of this bombing. 680 more were injured. Sadly, of the 168 who were lost, not that all of them are sad, but even more tragically, 19 of those were children who were at the daycare. So out of the 168, 19 were little kids, totally innocent. They weren't even working for the federal government, which obviously I'm going to get to the motive here in a little bit. And they were trying to target the federal government, but there were, well, pretty much everybody inside was innocent. But I'm saying there were a lot of really, really innocent people inside this building who had nothing to do with what these men perceived as a problem, the government. At this point in time in history, as of 1995, this was the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. Now, obviously, 9/11, 2001 surpasses this as far as the loss of life and loss of property damage. But this is still the second worst terrorist attack in U.S. history, and it is still the #1 domestic terrorist attack. So someone's going to have to unmute. But what's a domestic terrorist attack? What's that mean?
Is it someone who lives in the country?
Yeah, someone
like
said
a U.S. citizen attacking.
Yeah, so someone who's a U.S. citizen did this terrorist attack. So 9/11, that was foreign terrorists. This is American citizen who does this act of terror. Okay, so it is still the largest domestic terror attack in U.S. history and the second largest ever out of all terrorist attacks. So the FBI quickly moves to the scene and begins to investigate the crime. It takes them a little while. Well, it doesn't take them too long, but it takes them a little while. They got to dig through all piles of concrete. At the same time, there's also rescues going on to save people's lives who were stuck on some of the upper floors or who were under the rubble. People from across the globe came to help save people's lives. I mean, there were people coming from other countries, not just across the country, to help out in the effort of aiding the effort to save lives here. And the FBI, like I said, begins investigating. By the next day, they found the rear axle of the Ryder truck. It had an ID number on it, and it was traced to a body shop in Junction City, Kansas. The employees there, cooperating with the FBI, quickly put together a composite drawing of a man who had rented the van. The agents showed the drawing around town to local hotel employees, figuring out this person probably stayed in a hotel, and they supplied him a name, Tim McVeigh, who we know as Timothy McVeigh today. A quick call to the Bureau's Criminal Justice Information Services Division in West Virginia on April 21st led to an astonishing discovery. McVeigh was already in jail. So the FBI is investigating this, and they're looking into who did this, and everything points to Timothy McVeigh. They then look into where might Timothy McVeigh be, and he's already in jail. He was arrested 90 minutes after the bombing. Now, he wasn't arrested because he was thought to be the bomber, but a police officer noticed Timothy McVeigh was driving in a car without a license plate on the back, or the front for that matter. There was no license plate. So he pulled him over. Timothy McVeigh was carrying a concealed weapon, which he did not have a license for. So he was arrested because he was carrying a weapon. So he's in jail already for that. And they now find out he's already in custody. That's amazing. If you think about it, they didn't have to do some big, long manhunt. They didn't have to like try to figure out where he'd gone, because he could have gone halfway across the country. He could have been in Mexico or Canada by this point in time. But instead, he had been caught soon after. Now, I will say, I don't know why he's driving around in a car without a license plate on the back. That makes no sense. I'm like, you're guaranteed probably to get pulled over if you decide to do that. So, hey, glad it worked against him. It turns out he wasn't the only one involved. He was the one who drove the truck, started the fuse, and who did the bombing. But there was one other man. There were two men, really, but one only had knowledge of it, but he didn't really help in the event. So I'm not going to really mention him. That guy did get some time in prison, but he didn't get much of a sentence because he witnessed against Timothy McVeigh and the other man who was involved. And that man's name was Terry Nichols. So is Terry with a Y. Nichols is Nichols. So Terry Nichols helped build the bomb, helped plan the attack, but he wasn't there on the day of the attack. He didn't drive the truck. He didn't go with Timothy McVeigh. McVeigh did that by himself. These men were all former military in the U.S. Army. They were angry at the U.S. government because they felt the government had overstepped its power, especially the FBI and the ATF, which is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. These are based on two events. One happened in 1992. There was a standoff with a man named Randy Weaver at Ruby Ridge. I don't have time to go through that, but if you want to look into that one, it's pretty interesting. But the one that's probably even more significant was in 1993 in Waco, Texas. There was a group known as the Branch Davidian cult. It was a cult led by a man named David Koresh. They had been stockpiling firearms and weapons. The cult had. So the FBI found about this, and they sent in the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms group, because they take care of firearms, people who are breaking firearms laws. And there's a 51-day standoff in 1993 that occurs. But eventually, the ATF decides to attempt to execute a search warrant, which led to a firefight between the Branch Davidian cult and the ATF guys there, and it ends up that the cult building gets burnt down, and it ends up with the deaths of David Koresh and 75 others inside the building. Some of those people were innocent. There were women and children in there. However, it's still debatable. Even this was all on live TV. It's still debatable who started the fire. There are a lot of people who say David Koresh started the fire himself, that it wasn't the ATF that started the fire. But it is possible the ATF sent in some things that started a fire on accident. They certainly weren't trying to start a fire. So obviously everything went bad. And this was something that really affected Timothy McVeigh. And that happened on April 19th, 1993. So it's 2 years to the day of that event in Waco, Texas, that Timothy McVeigh decides to drive the moving truck up to the building in Oklahoma City. These men were caught. Terry Nichols obviously was caught. Terry Nichols was sentenced to life in prison without the opportunity for parole. And he's still serving in prison today. He's still alive. And he has no chance of getting out. He has tried to repeal, but appeal his sentence to try to get lessened, but it has not worked. I mean, they've said, no, sorry, we're not lessening your, his argument is that he helped devise the bomb early on, but he tried to get out, but it's too late. He already helped do it. So he played a role, and he is serving life in prison for that. Timothy McVeigh, was sentenced to death by lethal injection in a court trial. This court trial didn't take place in Oklahoma. They wanted him to have as fair a trial as you can get, because everybody's in America, even if you're a terrorist and everybody knows it, you're still supposed to get a trial that's innocent until proven guilty, which is the way things work here and the way it should work. Although through the evidence, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was executed by lethal injection on June 11th, 2001, a little over 6 years after the bombing took place. This is probably, obviously, as far as American history goes, possibly the most tragic event, probably the most tragic event. We've had some bad tornadoes that have been tragic, but probably not this tragic. So it's also just a significant event in American history. And, it's just one of those sad events that will be remembered. It's like lately there have been a lot of, well, there haven't been a lot in the last couple of years, but you guys have been alive for it. Unfortunately, there's been a decent amount of school shootings in the last 15, 20 years. And some of them are more tragic than the Columbine one, but the Columbine one's kind of the one that started it all off. So for some reason, people remember that. This here too, as far as terrorist attacks, this was the first major terrorist attack in U.S. history. There had been some attacks before, but this was the first one that had this significant of an impact. That was made such a difference in people's lives and took a lot of people's lives. So that's it for notes. That's it for all the notes that we're going to be taking the whole semester. We're almost done with this semester. Do you guys have any question over anything we covered today? Anything for the tests? The test will be pretty straightforward. Like I said, you can use your book and your notes and past tests. Anything you have, you can use. No question? Okay.
What is the time span that we can take the test again?
It'll be between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m.
Okay, and then any time between then we have 90 minutes?
You'll have 90 minutes, an hour and a half
Alrighty.
from the time you start. So yeah, and I'll be sending out that email, like I said, that morning, Monday. It'll be before 8 a.m., obviously, because I want you, if you, for some reason, want to get up at 8 a.m., I'm sure most of you won't be taking it at 8 a.m., but if you want to, it'll be available to start at 8 a.m. All the way till 10 p.m. I told you this with the last test. I would start before 10 p.m. I mean, I wouldn't wait to start it until 10 p.m., but I'm trying to give you a big window. That way, if you have something planned for part of that day, you can just plan out a 1.5 hour block for this. I know your other finals are falling other days. We're trying to coordinate to where they don't fall on the same days. So, and then remember, your biography is due this Saturday. So, anything else? If not, well then I guess I'll see you guys. Wish we could finish class, but next year we'll get to it. Next year, U.S. history. I hope you're all coming back to school at our school. But man, looking forward to doing American history with you guys as we start off with like the Civil War and that time period, and then move on past that. So I guess we'll see you guys later. Good luck on the test. Finish up your bio. Bye.